Hey, welcome to Classroom to Corporate Connections. I'm excited to share my journey from the classroom to corporate and build connections to help you succeed. My name is Sarah. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman with short blonde hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing blue glasses. This is season 1, episode 2, and it's called Guilt. Whoa, that's deep, maybe a little depressing. But guess what? It won't be because we're going to unpack it. We're going to talk about guilt. We're going to normalize it. And we're going to try to work to remove that stigma around that word. Now, you might notice something new tonight. I am trying out video with my audio. So I've launched a YouTube channel where you can also check out my podcasts. And I'm super excited for you to share them with others. Now, back to guilt. It sounds like we're going to conquer the world tonight, but probably not. Really, though, we are going to chat about it, and I want to hear your thoughts too. Quick disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist. I am simply here to share my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences around the guilt that I had in choosing to leave the classroom and where it has brought me to this point in my life. I highly advocate for the connection of therapists as it's been an important part of my journey in life, and that's what I have to say about that. So let's go ahead and dig in. You've probably heard a lot about teachers transitioning out of the classroom, and maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking, I've considered this. I want to transition out of the classroom, but I don't know what to do. And I feel really bad. I feel guilty for thinking this. And I think we, a collective, really talking about my feelings, but putting it out there for teachers in general, anyone in education, teachers, administrators, paraprofessionals. My wife left the education field as well just this year. And there is certainly a sense of guilt. I think one of the main reasons, you're going to kind of dive into several reasons tonight, but the main one that kind of pops top of mind is connection with students. Right? As educators, we build these really strong bonds with students over time. And I know in my experience, some of the years I looped with my students, particularly that last year before I left, I had about half of my class the year before in kindergarten. And then I also had them in first grade. So that strong bond and leaving the classroom ultimately means you're leaving behind those connections, whether that is leaving behind the connections of seeing those kids every day, but also the connections of walking through the hallway with your current class and an old student who's maybe now in an upper grade at the school, stopping by and saying, "Hey, hi, Mrs. Hempel. I really, really missed you." Or, "What are you doing this weekend? How are your kids?" Right? Those connections that you built last longer than the 180 days in your school year. So that can be emotionally challenging. And as an educator that's transitioning out of education, you might feel guilty for not being there anymore to support and guide these students. And what I have to tell you is, we'll get there. You have to do what's best for you. That's truly what I believe. You heard me say it last week. You'll hear me say it again. Do more of what makes you happy. That's kind of the phrase that I keep coming back to, and we'll dig a little more into that. Another reason that teachers feel this guilt, or educators in general, is you've got a strong sense of responsibility for the students that you've cared for their academic and personal development. When you're transitioning out of the classroom, can kind of make you feel like you're abandoning that responsibility. You're abandoning these kids, which feelings of abandoning responsibility often lead to, yeah, you guessed it, guilt. So that's a big one. Another reason, you heard me say it last week. I said I've envisioned being a teacher since I was a little girl, teaching to my stuffed animals, my siblings. I have a passion for teaching. And if you picked up on that, I just said I have. I didn't say I had. I still have a passion for teaching, for educating others. Many teachers are deeply passionate about their profession. They genuinely love teaching. And if you know much about what it pays to be a teacher or a paraprofessional, often we're not doing it for the paycheck because it's really not that grand, especially when you consider the weight of the world that sits on a teacher's shoulders. Okay. So leaving the classroom can feel and felt like to me like I was giving up on something that I was passionate about, that I maybe was going to let everyone down because I wasn't continuing to chase this dream that I chased since I was a little girl. I also had this guilt of, when you are teaching, that you've probably heard the quote, to teach is to touch a life forever. And I truly believe that. I really do. I've got great relationships with a lot of families that I've taught their kids over the years, going all the way back to my very first classroom in Danville, Indiana. And there's a student who has now graduated high school, graduated college, has a great job, and I still am connected with her and her family on Facebook. Um, so you can have this guilt over thinking you're not going to continue to make a difference in students' lives or in these particular students' lives that you've touched. And you know what? Being out of the classroom for over a year now, I'm here to tell you that's not true. If you want to continue to make a difference and stay connected, you can. The power is in your hands. Occasionally, I've done it a couple of times. I will arrange like a park play date and invite my old friends from the classroom. I've gone into the school and volunteered in some of my friends' classrooms just to have the opportunity to make a difference, to connect with kids, and fulfill some of that little missing piece in my life. Continuing on, pressure and expectations. That's another, I guess, reason that leads to guilt. You've got external pressures and expectations as a teacher, right? You've got it coming from parents, administrators, society in general, and that pressure can be too heavy for you. Is one way to look at it, right? There's so many things. You think about teachers these days; they are a teacher, a therapist, they're the nurse, they are breaking up fights. Sometimes they're parenting, sometimes they are the lunch lady who's helping serve breakfast and lunch and snacks, and they're the recess monitor, and they're the paraprofessional, and they're providing English language support, and they're providing special education support, right? As an educator, there are so many pressures and expectations. But also, I want to look at those two words in a slightly different light. Those two words also can be the pressure to stay in the classroom. You might feel guilty that you're letting other people down, that you're letting down the families, that you're letting down your administrator, that you're letting down your colleagues, and you feel guilty that you haven't lived up to these expectations of everyone else, and instead you're choosing a different path forward with your career. I'll go back to it again. Do more of what makes you happy. Kind of piggybacking off of what I just said, talking about letting your colleagues down. If you have a close knit team or part of a close knit team, you know that your departure, whether it's mid-year or end of year, will likely lead to additional work or stress for your colleagues. And that's tough. That's a hard pill to swallow, especially when you go back to that other component of being passionate about what you do. You know that your colleagues are likely pretty passionate, and you don't want to let them down. You don't want to disappoint them. And so in turn, how do you feel? You feel guilty. So I'll say it again. Go back to doing more of what makes you happy. Moving on, I've got a couple more that I want to talk about. Reasons feel guilty. Another one would be impact on students. So you might worry about how your departure would affect your students' education. For me in particular, I was a little worried because I was leaving not quite at the end of the school year. I left with 3 weeks left in the school year to start my next role. And there was definitely guilt around that. What are they going to do for the last 3 weeks? And some of that guilt and that pressure came from outside sources. Some of it came from colleagues. And, what if your replacement, and some of it, a lot of it really was just me, right? Because I'm really incredibly hard on myself. What if my replacement isn't as good as I was? What if they don't have the ability to make strong connections like I did? I was incredibly fortunate in my situation that we had a long-term sub who had worked in my classroom a lot that was able to step in and finish out the last 3 weeks. So that did alleviate a significant amount of that guilt, as well as the fact that I finished up all the grades, had everything ready to go before those last 3 weeks. So I wasn't super concerned about it negatively impacting their academics. But I certainly was worried about how it would impact the students' social emotional stability with me leaving. And, first graders, right? 6, 7 years old, not totally understanding why is Mrs. Hempel leaving the classroom? And that left me with a lot of guilt. One of the things that's made that a little easier is just staying connected to some of those families that wanted to stay connected with me and knowing that they were happy and proud of me for doing more of what makes me happy. Another thing that leads to guilt is personal fulfillment. So looking to do something that makes you happy, but prioritizing your own needs as a teacher and your own desires over that commitment or passion that you have for teaching. And so for me, I knew that I was not continuing to be happy, but I also wanted to pursue something that would allow me to continue to learn and grow because I am so passionate about education, whether it's the education of children or adult education. And I'm incredibly fortunate that I was able to find something that I was able to continue to kind of fill my bucket and help me to, you guessed it, do more of what made me happy. Last but not least, the last one I really want to address that kind of came top of mind is probably one of the most important in my situation. Cultural and societal norms. So when I think about cultural and societal norms, for me, there's the idea that in cultures and society, like teaching is valued very highly, and leaving the profession could be a betrayal of that value. That's one side to the coin. The other side is, we could call it cultural and societal, we could call it political, bringing some of those beliefs into the classroom that really started post-COVID to lead to a big divide. We're all aware of it, a divide in our country, a divide in our classrooms, a divide in our neighborhoods, and even, in some cases, a divide in our families. And I had some pretty fantastic families. I remember the first year that I went back to teaching and I was dating Jen, and I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, how am I going to tell these families that I have a girlfriend, right? That I'm, school starts up, that I'm engaged to a girl. That was kind of a little nerve-wracking. And so I put up my All About Me board, and I just had pictures of my family and myself and Jen and the kids and stuff. And I remember, I just didn't say anything. Back to school night came and went, and I just didn't address it. Some people were like, oh, I love your pictures, great. Didn't address it. And then the first week of school, I was talking to the students, and I just said, so this is Miss Jen in the pictures. And they're like, why is there a girl? And, and they're asking me these questions. And one little student said, at the time, my name was Miss McNeely. And one little student said, Miss McNeely, you can love whoever you want to love. That's what my mom and dad taught us. And I was like, oh, you get an A, you get an A, you get an A. No, I'm just kidding. But I was like, it warmed my heart, that this child had already been exposed to just love is love and love is a beautiful thing, right? Um, it made my decision to come out in the classroom a little bit easier. And, because most people don't have to think about telling about their family or what they did on the weekend. And why should I, as a gay educator, have to consider these things? But the reality is, I do. I did have to consider these things. And as time progressed, and I had been at the school a couple of years, there were some parents that whispered, oh, you don't want her to have you don't want your child to be in her class. She's the gay teacher. And you know what? That's fine. You can be in a different classroom, and I'm just fine with that. But as you start looking at the news and the politics that stepped into the classroom, and you see people, educators, getting in trouble for things that we've always done, certain books that we've always read, and they're being accused of indoctrinating students. These were the things that I was like, I just can't. It is mentally and emotionally draining to be part of the LGBTQ community sometimes. And when you are faced with the constant barrage of, oh, do I read this? Do I say that? I'm a huge advocate of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work. And yet here I am questioning, like, as a gay woman, can I say this in my classroom, or is it going to be perceived in the wrong way? And having to be overly cautious of things that I shouldn't. I'm educating children. I'm not trying to, trust me, reading a book called Sparkle Boy is certainly not going to turn any child gay. It's going to show them that they can express their emotions and they can feel free to be who they want to be. And if as a little boy, they want to paint their fingernails sparkly like their big sister, go for it. Have fun and just be you and do more of what makes you happy. Right? And so all of the pressure of all of that just kind of piled on top of all these other things that I've told you about today. And that was a lot of guilt. And at the end of the day, I knew I had to focus on myself and put myself first so that I could be the best wife, the best mom, the best friend, the best educational advocate. I have continued my work outside of the classroom to advocate for social justice issues that are present in our schools. And I will get into some of that work here later in another episode. But I can continue to do those things while also taking care of myself. So what I want to remind you before we wrap up is it's important to note these feelings of guilt are natural. They're common. Honestly, I would guess that anyone transitioning from any career to a new career might have some kind of guilt about what they're leaving behind. But I want you to know that all of these things I talked about can be managed. We can figure out how to work through them. I'm happy to connect with you. Connect with me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and we can talk through this. We can make it another episode. If you are someone that has helped work through this, I would love to have you on my show so that we can talk about it, but we can manage these things. As an educator, you need to remember your decision to transition out of the classroom and into something else. Maybe it's corporate, maybe it's staying at home, maybe it's something entirely different. It's a personal decision. You have to think about your needs, your circumstances, your personal self, and your family, and do what's best for you. I would encourage you, if you're comfortable, seek support from good friends, possibly colleagues, or if not colleagues that are in education, colleagues that are out of education, maybe in an industry or a place that you want to go, you want to transition to. Mentors, a therapist, these are all great people that can help you navigate your feelings, find ways to continue to make a positive impact on children or in education, even if it's outside of the traditional classroom setting. So I hope that we unpacked guilt just enough that if you're considering it, you can continue to consider it. And we have so much more to talk about. I'm so excited to talk to you next week as we continue this journey from classroom to corporate. And until next time, I just want to say, remember, Deborah Messing says, do more of what makes you happy. And when it doesn't make you happy anymore, make a change without fear.